That morning, Gideon called Agnes and Caleb into the parlor. Agnes arrived with all the cold authority of a sea woman who had always felt in control. Every line of her black dress and the set of her jaw spoke of her certainty that she was the rightful matriarch. Caleb looked like a man who'd never learned to wield a lariat. He was soft at the edges, untested in the work that made bones, his confidence having curdled into petulance upon seeing his half-brother alive. "You're alive," Agnes said, not in delight, but as a statement of fact and inconvenience, as if his survival was a rude interruption of proper business. "I am," Gideon replied, his voice rough but utterly steady, a low, slow rumble that commanded the air. "And I'm less inclined to die now that I've seen what happens when I'm mislaid." He named the damage done, reciting from the ranch books he'd pulled from the safe, the accounts that were mismanaged, the allowances stolen, and, worst of all, May's dignity stripped. He didn't raise his voice. The facts spoke for themselves, each one a hammer blow to their carefully constructed lie. He presented his physician's note now, a real one signed by Dr. Crow and verified by the specialist from Denver, who, under duress and payment, had recanted his grim diagnosis. His heart, Gideon said plainly, was not failing. It was strong enough to keep him for a good long while. He had returned to set the ledger straight. Agnes clutched the arm of her chair as though to keep her center, her knuckles white. Caleb stammered an excuse about temporary management and unverified rumors. Rufus, quietly present by the door, let vengeance be Gideon's work rather than his own. Some men know when to stand in the afterwind of a storm. Gideon's retribution was swift and surgical. He did not want a scandal, he wanted finality. Agnes and Caleb were given a sum, a single generous payment, calculated to prevent a protracted legal fight and silence any whispers about the will. The condition was a clear deadline to vacate the property, effective immediately. He escorted them personally from the parlor to the gate, where 2 wagons waited. For Caleb, this was a financial humiliation, a public stripping of the future he had claimed. For Agnes, it was a profound personal displacement. The home she had ruled with an iron fist was no longer hers. 2 days later, Rufus found Gideon by the barn, his gaze fixed on the western boundary where the land dropped away into canyons. "Caleb won't let this go quiet, boss," Rufus said, cleaning a rifle with the slow, meticulous movements of a man prepared for trouble. "He's running with that outfit out of Mesa Flats, the ones who run off cattle by night. They owe him favors for the ranch money he helped them steal while you were gone." Gideon nodded, eyes sharp, scanning the horizon. "He's a weak hand, Rufus, but a weak hand with a borrowed weapon is still a dangerous one. He's going to test the boundaries. We'll be ready." Gideon knew the frontier was a place where justice often wore a badge and a gun in the same holster, and that sometimes the steadiness of a man's aim was the only law that mattered. He began riding again, slowly at first, resting his healing leg, but with purpose. He was rebuilding his body while defending his claim. Gideon rehired Rufus, promoted him to foreman with a significant increase in wages, and set to work healing more than the broken leg. The deepest fracture was the trust between him and the town, and between him and May. He paid town debts run against May's name, not out of charity, but because they were liabilities Caleb had intentionally fostered. He wrote checks for merchants, establishing a new pattern of integrity. He rode fence lines and listened to the land as if learning it anew, proving to the hands that the true owner was back. More importantly, he began courting May again, not with grand speeches, but with small restorations. A crate of fresh hens for the garden she tended through starvation months. He had her old, sturdy sewing machine retrieved from storage, polished, and placed in the sunlight of their main bedroom. Afternoons were spent sitting near the fence, bringing water as she worked, listening to her stories instead of giving orders. He needed her to know he saw her, not as an heir, but as his chosen partner. The intimacy they shared now was deeper, forged in shared struggle. One evening, after the ranch hands had turned in, May sat on the porch swing, watching the moonlight pool on the dirt road, the vast, echoing stillness of the plains around them. Gideon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his jaw against her dark, thick hair. "I should never have left you to them," he murmured, the guilt a low current in his voice. "I secured the land, but I forgot to secure you." May twisted in his arms, facing him. She cupped his gaunt cheek, her thumb tracing the deep lines carved by fever and worry. "You came back, That is all that matters, Gideon. I never stopped believing that. Her faith in him had been her own anchor during the isolation. He kissed her, a slow, deliberate claiming that was far more than passion. It was a kiss that acknowledged the distance of the last months, the fear, the betrayal, and the fragile hope that had kept them alive. The air between them was heavy with unspoken emotion and the quiet, strong attraction that existed between two people who understood the weight of life and had chosen to carry it together. Inside, in the vast, shadowed bedroom that was now theirs again, they found a new rhythm. They were two broken pieces, fitting together into a stronger whole. Their lovemaking was not about hurried passion, but about anchoring, a slow, tender confirmation of their present and their future. Gideon's hands no longer just the hands of a rancher, but the hands of a man who had been given a reprieve, moved, with a patient reverence. He learned the landscape of her grief and her strength, tracing the small, hidden fears of the child she almost lost. May responded with a quiet, fierce tenderness, meeting his strength with her own. It was a mutual, sensual surrender to a shared future, a constant, tangible reminder that the heart could fail, but the touch of a trusted partner was a steady thing. The promise of their child was no longer just an heir, but a physical manifestation of their resilience and defiance. Gideon knew the ranch was his, but he saw the ambition in May, the need to build something that was hers alone. He asked her to help him with something in town, a boarded-up building on the corner of Main, sound at its bones but uncared for, purchased under Rufus's name to avoid suspicion. "Design it how you like," he said, handing her the deed. "Run it. It will be yours." May, who'd never run a business, took to it like a woman who had been practicing discipline her whole life. She poured her energy, the fierce focus that had kept her alive, into the project. She oversaw the carpenters, chose the layout, and insisted on a large communal dining room. The old boarding house became the Hearthstone. 12 comfortable rooms, a public dining room, staff managed under May's brisk, fair hand. Travelers found the food good and the beds honest. The Hearthstone earned its name as a refuge of safety and competence. The opening night was a triumph of steady effort. May, visibly pregnant now, moved through the crowded dining room with the poise of a woman who was no longer the Red Stag waitress, but the proprietor of her own destiny, respected and feared in equal measure by those who had once scorned her. The next afternoon, the moment Gideon had been waiting for arrived. Caleb, flanked by 2 rough riders from Mesa Flats, men known for their cheap violence, stalked into the Hearthstone. The men looked like they had been dipped in whiskey and bad intent, their spurs jangling offensively against the clean floorboards. Caleb's eyes were narrowed, his face twisted with the entitlement of a man who felt he'd been cheated, seeking one last, public humiliation. "Fancy whorehouse," Caleb sneered, loud enough to stop the low hum of conversation. "Didn't take you long to spend Gideon's gold, did it, widow?" May walked up to him, calm despite the churning in her stomach, holding her hand steady. "This is a respectable establishment, Caleb, and I am Mrs. Merritt. You are not welcome." Caleb lunged, a flash of cheap silver glinting in his hand. Not a gun, but a heavy ornamental knife he meant to use to slash a table or cause a lasting physical threat. Before he could take a step, a blur of old leather and fury slammed into him. Gideon, who had been sitting quietly in a corner by the window, waiting for this exact moment. Gideon was still lean from the fever, but the years of work had left a core of hard muscle. He used the solid, oak chair he was sitting on as a shield, smashing it into Caleb's chest before throwing a short, vicious right hook that found the softer edge of Caleb's jaw. Caleb crumpled, stunned, his knife clattering onto the floorboards. The 2 Mesa Flats men drew their pistols, but Rufus, who had been guarding the door from the outset, was faster. The sharp snick-snick of his Winchester cocking echoed like a final verdict. "You came here to cause trouble on private property." Rufus's voice was low, devoid of heat, which made it all the more terrifying. "Turn around. Walk out. The next noise I hear that isn't boots on the floor will be a round fired in the name of self-defense." The 2 men exchanged a look of panicked calculation. They knew Rufus, they knew Gideon. The fight was not worth the cost. They helped the winded, spitting Caleb to his feet and dragged him out the door. As they stumbled out, Gideon picked up Caleb's dropped knife and broke the decorative hilt off with a sharp snap, ruining the weapon. He tossed the blade out the door into the dust. He looked at May, his chest heaving, his face a mask of controlled rage that quickly softened to fierce devotion. "A man who pulls a knife on a pregnant woman deserves to be staked to an anthill," Gideon grated. His words meant only for May. He then looked at the silent, watching patrons, straightening his vest. "This is a safe place. Any man who thinks different will answer to me. You have my word." The incident cemented two things in the territory's mind. The Hearthstone was May's fortress, untouchable and respectable, and Gideon Merritt was still the weather eye, capable of meeting a storm head-on, and now had something far more valuable to protect than land. The inheritance of hope. When May went into labor one gray morning in November, Dr. Crow and midwife Beatrice Ashby kept watch. The birth was long but uncomplicated, aided by May's powerful, hard-working body. At 3:00 in the afternoon, a small dark-haired girl arrived, crying strong, a sound of triumph after so much struggle. May held the infant close, trembling with exhaustion and relief, and whispered a name. Leah, for May's grandmother, who had once left a bowl of bread in kindness to a small girl, and taught her to keep both hands busy and honest. Gideon touched Leah's wet hair, and felt something in his chest close and clear, like an old wound finely stitched. The house that had once seemed so large now felt exactly the right size, filled with promise. Life tilled itself into a new pattern. Sleep was sparse, and love was patient. Gideon rose at all hours for feedings, rocked Leah under the window as May watched the stars bleed into morning. By spring, Leah was 6 months, a sturdy, smiling child, and May was again with child. They laughed at their efficiency, at the way the land had a habit of being both unkind and fertile. The Hearthstone flourished under May. She taught cooks, kept ledgers, ran, accounts with an even hand that was both fair and firm. The ranch, under Gideon's careful reorganization, expanded to 50,000 acres, their herds growing steadily. Word spread around 3 territories that Merritt hands were paid honestly and treated fairly. The family grew, welcoming a son, Samuel, 3 years later. Rufus became more than a hired hand. He became family. Eli Pendry and Mabel remained friends, often visiting with jars of preserves and hard-won gossip about neighbors. Gideon stayed until his bones felt old, but his heart remained steady. He lived long enough to hold grandchildren and to see Leah marry a neighboring rancher's son who respected work and loved stories. When he died at 83 peacefully, with May clutching his hand, the whole territory came to the funeral. The man who had once been told his heart would fail within months had lived decades longer because he had found a reason to keep it beating. May lived to 92, tending the Hearthstone for as long as her hands would allow, only passing the management over to her daughter-in-law when she was 85. She kept a leather journal under her pillow, recipes, accounts, small rules for running a house, and on the last page, a line written again and again, "I am not beautiful, I am real. Real lasts longer than beautiful." Every spring when the cottonwoods leafed along the creek, the Merritt place held a dance under the stars. Children chased one another with sticky, sweet faces. Someone always told the story of the stew that spilled in the Red Stag Inn. Someone always laughed until tears came. In that laughter, you can hear 2 people who started with little more than grit and stubbornness and built something that outlasted them both. The frontier is harsh. It takes a queer pleasure in breaking people down. But for those who choose steadiness, who show up, who work, who practice small mercies, the frontier can also be where grace gathers like rain in a dry place. Gideon and May's story is no fairy tale. It is a ledger of ordinary bravery. It is proof that when kindness finds resolve and resolve finds kindness, the result is more durable than gold.